Welcome to another empowering episode of Strive 365, your go-to source for conquering life's challenges and thriving no matter the odds. Whether you're seeking mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual growth, we're here to help guide you towards a better life. I am your host, Justin Arnold, coming to you from the amazing Rockbox studio. Today, we're privileged to host Connor Wills. I will not announce all his many titles, but they will be in the notes below as he has a plentiful number of them. He's a beacon of hope and healing in the mental health field. We are friends and have known each other for a little while now, and I knew I had to have this guy on here. He has nearly 15 years of experience. He has dedicated his life to empowering teens, young adults, their families to overcome emotional, behavioral, and substance-related challenges. He's a licensed holistic psychotherapist, professional speaker, and consultant, and Connor's expertise spans residential treatment centers, school-based counseling, and inpatient psychiatric settings. His approach, deeply influenced by his personal journey and professional dedication, aims to build trust and rapport with those he serves, guiding them through their most trying years with compassion and understanding. Currently a graduate professor of psychology and counseling, Connor continues to impact lives beyond his clinical work. So join us today as we dive into Connor's holistic approach to mental health, his journey in the field, and how he uses his passion to connect with and inspire others towards greater well-being and self-awareness. So welcome, Connor. Hope I got some things there correct. But thanks for coming on today. Thanks for making the time, man.
Dude, it's a pleasure. I'm so glad we're doing this, and just thank you so much for having me.
For sure, man. Your energy is good. You're a very knowledgeable, insightful dude. Obviously, hopefully people got some stuff from there to know what you're about. And I'm sure some people that are listening could benefit from what you have to say. So could you maybe start explaining the concept behind Quantum Psychotherapy Group and what inspired you to integrate quantum theory and psychotherapy and to get it all started?
Yeah, man. That's the question I get asked like every day. I almost have people who call and I'm always like, how do I do this constantly? Let me think of how to. So long story short, my wife, Erica, my life partner, is also my partner in business. And we launched Quantum only 2 years ago, actually. And when we were thinking about how to do this from the ground up, the word that came to mind is authenticity. So it's like, we're not here to project our own beliefs, our own values, this kind of thing. We meet the clients where they're at, of course. But how do we take what's authentic for us, what brought us to this field, what we find effective and helpful, and I guess embody might be the word. How do we embody that? So right down to every real plant we have that I get to water each week here at the office, everything is authentic and felt in that way. So for us, life is about a holistic approach, right? Mind, body, spirit, whatever that means for you. So if I'm just, doing a lot of reading about the brain, the mind, psychology, that's great. How's my body? If I'm only going to church or doing some kind of spiritual work, but I'm not taking care of my mental health, something is amiss, right? Something's off balance. So how do we find balance for those things? So that's kind of the approach, how it started. And then very encouraged by the research around quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and how it relates to the big questions. Who are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Why do all the whys? So, hard question to answer, but I think that's what comes to mind as far as our approach and how.
For those that are new to like maybe quantum mechanics and quantum physics, could you explain maybe that and maybe people understand a little bit more?
Or sure. And there's so much there, and there's new research coming out all the time. But I think the most exciting thing for me about it, I can recommend a documentary called What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm not bleeping for your audience. That's like the actual title, What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole. It's a great place to start. But essentially it looks at how everything is made of particles, right? This water bottle, my hand, everything is made up of these super subatomic particles, tiny things. What quantum physics is looking at is, well, how come these particles are not in what's called superposition? It's not like there's this concrete structure. Like this isn't just one atom and just the way it is. It actually functions more as waves. So in that there's potential. Just as a human being, I may have a trauma history. I may have certain external factors that are weighing on my life and my peace, but I'm not in superposition. That's not my story. I don't have to live by that. How do I manifest my life, so to speak, in this way. So what quantum physics is looking at is what is the core of everything? What is it made of? Why is everything seemingly connected since the moment of the Big Bang? There's so much we can go into, man, but to me, it's all about just trying to understand like the connection between everything, including us from ourselves.
Okay. So like your deep experience working with teens, young adults, their families, how does quantum psychotherapy uniquely address like these multifaceted challenges that you get of these individuals, especially the things that, you talk about, I've read about, from the emotional, the behavioral, the substance issues?
That's a great question, man. And, humans are so multidimensional. Every case is unique and every kid is unique and I think trying to understand is a good place to start. So if I have a client or a family situation going on, I really want to understand, not just like, well, my kid this is how a lot of the calls start, right? Parent calls in, yeah, my kid has ADHD and bipolar and depression and they're failing. And we have this story. And I'm not invalidating what it must be like to be a parent in that situation, right? That's those things, sure, maybe. And recognizing that understanding the why. When we talk about trauma therapy or trauma-informed care that so many kids are coming in with, especially when we have like co-occurring substance use with the mental health, which so often overlap. In trauma therapy, we say, instead of saying what's wrong with you, we should frame it as what happened to you. It evokes curiosity, compassion. So trying to understand what's driving it, no matter how ludicrous the behavior is on the surface. I don't care if the kid's sitting here telling me, yeah, I don't want to do this either. I believe you. And in some way, whether fully conscious or not, there's something about this that is helpful. I don't like right, wrong, good, bad, black, white. I don't like dualistic thinking, but something is helpful. And if we can tap into that and understand without shame or judgment of how does this serve me, that's a good place to start, I think, before we can start to build solutions.
I think that's so important too. Like, I mean, I've shared maybe briefly on an episode here about after our house fire, when I was young, going to a therapist, then going to a hypnotherapist, and the similar thing was said to me which was different than what was said to the others that were affected in my family, and that was, "You're good. You don't need therapy." And I think I've shared this with you, and it's always been interesting to me because it's like, then why do I still feel like I'm not, and so I had to find my own healing process. So I love the way you approach this and having compassion and understanding and not acting like something's wrong. Because I think in those situations, those therapists were trying to find something wrong. And maybe there wasn't necessarily in that. So I like your approach is more about the why, like what happened, understanding without shame and judgment, and just the difference that I hear. So I'm curious, and we've kind of talked, but like maybe not obviously, I imagine you've had your own challenges that might have informed this approach to helping others. If so, could you share those challenges and maybe how they informed your approach to develop your ways in doing things?
Sure, man. Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. Life
if
is
you're
such a
comfortable,
journey, so
of course.
Yeah. Life is such a journey. And to me, like the older I get, I guess, the more my lens expands. So like I could answer this question, talk about only my early childhood. I could talk about my tumultuous teen years, getting in trouble, getting sent to a program myself, almost not graduating, on and on and on and on, running with a really rough crew of kids in like the punk rock scene. We can go on and on. But I think that I've always been drawn to the toughest cases, like especially earlier in my career, really like cut my teeth in the trenches, so to speak. I worked in the projects in Richmond, Virginia. Like, I'm driving to do an in-home session. I got people trying to sell me drugs and thinking like I'm there as a customer, working acute psychiatric, like intense stuff, gangs, a lot of that. And I think that I've always been drawn to those kind of kids, the tough cases, the kids who don't implode and shut down, the kids who explode, getting in trouble in school, home, community, legally. So I guess what I'm trying to say and answer your questions is that I was that kid.
Okay. So I was going to say like why,
Yeah, no, I grew up in a community where we didn't have gangs. But had we, I would have joined one. Brotherhood, safety, community, camaraderie, power, control. What's not to love? So although I got into trouble as a kid, and I did gravitate towards certain groups and other communities, I think working with those tough cases and mirroring and seeing myself in them, it just taught me how to be compassionate, be understanding, regardless of this kid's rap sheet, trying to understand the why, what happened to you. And so often, in my experience, personally and professionally, the clients I work with, somebody knows their story. They can read you the bullet points, no problem. This happened, this happened, this happened. That's the content. But going to the deeper emotion or meaning, or how it affects me in the past and present, or my belief in myself for the future, that's a whole nother ball game. So I hope I'm answering your question. It's a deep one. But
well, how about this, man? Let's get some people trying to relate. Do you have a story maybe you could share that deeply impacted you, maybe to a deep emotional level, or someone that you deeply impacted that you're like, man, I don't know, maybe there isn't, but something along the lines, it didn't have to be quite like this, but maybe along the lines of like, just, man, I'm glad I met that person, helped that person, man, it really changed their life, whatever, like some story like that, or stories. Feel free to be open here and share whether it was something that even changed your perspective to help your clients better, or somebody, again, like I said, that you really impacted at a deep level to change maybe or evolve the trajectory of their life. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, there's so many examples. Where do I begin? Let me breathe into that for a second.
breathe, brother.
Yeah, man. Like a kid who I really feel like impacted and I learned lessons through it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Like something that either you learned, or if you have one that one that maybe impacted you, or somebody that you impacted at a deep level. It sounds like you have several, so just pick one or two, and like just the impact of your work.
Yeah. One example that for some reason is coming up for me is I used to work at a program. It was the largest residential program in New Jersey. And what that means is kids who are looking at not juvenile hall, not 365 or less, but like looking at long-term, like youth prison. There's one youth prison in the state. We used to get those kids. So it's a lot of gangs, drugs, violence. It was intense. But we had no guards and no bars in the program. So it was all based on our rapport as counselors, clinicians, and associated staff. So I think of one kid in particular. He was a gang leader from Jersey City, New Jersey. It's a pretty serious charge. It's violence. Tough guy, charisma. He was a leader, right? And just like getting to know him and learning his trauma story and what he went through. And through our relationship and rapport, what I remember is it was his last day in treatment. He probably stayed like, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months. Every day these kids live there, right? He was like 17. I catch him by this garden outside. It was an old convent that was converted into a program. And he's kind of like just shuffling around. I'm like, what's up, man? And he just bursts into tears. I'm like, you're leaving today. Like, you did it. You don't have to go, you don't get locked up. Your PO's working with you. This is a good thing. And he said, Con, I'm scared to death. I can't get out of the gang. I can't go back home. Here, I feel safe. The program where like I raised hell for a couple of weeks and I didn't want to be here. He's like, I feel safe here. I can't go home. I can't get out of this. You know? And just like for me, there's so many examples like that where like you see a kid, you read a rap sheet, or you read an article about someone who's gotten arrested, or you make a judgment about somebody. But when you switch that narrative to what happened to you and understanding someone's upbringing and trauma history, and you create that sense of safety, that soft place for them to land, I don't know, man. It really humbles you. Gratitude so much. So
you
much.
Got me on a cliffhanger,
everyone.
though. Did he end up staying? Did he go? What happened to him?
As would happen with a lot of kids, I think he self-sabotaged to get an extra week out of the deal. Sometimes they do that. Like, yo, watch me go smoke a cigarette now or something like that. It wasn't that serious. I'm joking, but I think he stayed another week, and I don't know what happened to him.
Oh man,
I have no idea what happened.
I'm curious. Pray that he's doing all right, man.
Year and don't know.
Yeah, I imagine you don't really stay in contact for like, it's not like you all become Facebook friends and create a group or anything. So, man, that'd be interesting to hear. But I hope that, I mean, it sounds like you did a massive difference in this person's life. And maybe once he left, that was the adversity you needed to make a difference. And maybe not just on his own. You never know. Yeah. Maybe he made a difference on others' lives too.
In the field, one thing I've learned is that, especially when working like the intense stuff, like bad news travels faster than quote good news. So you hear about the kids who get arrested, the OD, they die, suicide. That happens a lot. But on the contrary, like when the good news does come through, like you relish in it. Like very briefly, I can think of an example even better. Like I had a girl who was so suicidal during COVID, like multiple hospitals. Like this girl could have died. And fast forward, what's been 4 years? Now she's in medical school and she's going to be a psychiatrist working with kids because of her experience. So, there are incredible success quote stories and rewarding examples, of course.
What about you and your own adversity, like within the career path? Have you there's obviously a level of like care and passion, it sounds like. I mean, in what you do, have you ever had some challenge or like for example, like I've had situations, not much since I became an entrepreneur, which has been great. But when I worked in like the for-profit and nonprofit sectors of health and wellness, and I worked for somebody, like, all I cared about was the people, and I wanted to make a difference. And sometimes my passion led down ways that, created some challenge or confrontation and pushback from others that got to a point where like, I had to either quit or find my own path, which is what happened. And that's where we are today. And it was the best thing I ever did, even if I, no matter how it worked out. Is there anything like that like you've just, you were always there for the kids or the clients or the people you were working with, but met some kind of, roadblock or challenge that you really had to just work to strive through in that situation?
Oh, brother, yeah.
Mind sharing?
I'm like feeling my body react as you're saying
Breathe,
that. Like, yeah.
Man. This could help people. That's why we're talking about it,
Yeah, man. What I can say is, I wrote a punk rock
Breathe.
Song the other night, and like,
I love it.
I've always had that mentality of like, just like do what's right, speak up, use your voice. To me, that's the punk rock mentality. That's the philosophy, right? And I carry that into the work I've done since day one. And I was that kid, so trying to find that balance of like, working as a team and following protocols, procedures, and trying to name things that maybe need to shift, right? Or trying to be a staunch advocate for kids. So I've definitely had experience in my career where certain colleagues, leadership, program policies, there's been tension. I think I've navigated pretty well overall, but there's been some times where I had to step away because I was like, as my Irish great-grandfather would say, I'm holding back the tide with the hay rake. And I've learned kids need help everywhere. So if I can't remain somewhere, there's a kid who's going to be getting me on the other end of the next thing I'm doing. And that kid's going to be, that's what's meant to happen. I believe that's what's meant to be. So I have faced adversity for sure, but every single time it's happened, it's only led me to something greater.
Yeah, I love that. I can agree to that statement. I use, because many people know, you know that I'm a believer as the latter part of my life. And I always say something along when I feel like push or shove, like God's trying to teach me, God's got to kick me to move, God's got to literally like put up such a severe roadblock for me because I might be just heading down a direction, and he's got to really send me a message. Like, for me to even start my own business, it came from like literally just about every, this was my relatable, every single roadblock and wall and ceiling, and to the point of frustration and just not being a quitter, that I had to change directions, and it was the best thing. But it's like we had to go head on right with it, and I talk about some of these things in my book, and so I always want people to share that, because like that's what this podcast is all about. Like, it's one thing to share great stuff. There's a million podcasts, but it's another thing to like overcome, like when you're at the point of almost wanting to quit and you don't, and you find out on the other end of quit is an even better thing, right? And that's why I love to have people like you, because I know. So like, continue to share that as we go through this podcast and talk about it. And if things come to you and you want to add to it or share to it, because that's what makes it great. Because everybody on this planet, except for maybe a small percentage, is struggling in some way. And I believe there's waves through people's lives where like, there's days they might wake up, or they might be halfway through the day and they want to quit, and they just need something, or there's something that uplifts them. And sometimes they need to hear something on a podcast or a tip, or know that somebody else might be going through it and they found a way to overcome it. And here's where we provide that. So thanks for sharing that. Just continue. So like, what are some of the tools? What are some of the tools and the things and techniques that you might use with, in your practice, and as far as to facilitate the healing and the growth and the things that you do?
Beautiful. Yeah. So again, we're holistic. So mind, body, spirit, whatever that means for clients. So I'm very encouraged by how the most cutting edge Western science around, for instance, the autonomic nervous system, which is, I think of it as the highway that anxiety travels through the brain and body. How much cutting edge scientific research mirrors what ancient practices, spiritual traditions from around the world, across space and time, how they mirror. How is it that yogis in India thousands of years ago knew this thing that Western science is just figuring out now? Like, we're just learning that trauma is more physiological than psychological, right? If 80% of the information from my vagus nerve, from my autonomic nervous system is going bottom up, as we say, from the body to the brain, trauma, it's Greek for wound, right? It's not the punch, it's the impact, it's the wound. And how trauma wounds the body. That is where I find the most efficient, effective way to start for so many kids with, say, anxiety. So instead of just coping skills, which you can frigging Google or look on TikTok nowadays, right? Let's talk about your autonomic nervous system. What is it? Let's understand it. And then let's start to implement some practices, breath work, meditation, cold exposure, for instance. Let's do these things disciplined, not just when you're feeling stress or anxiety, but in a preemptive, proactive way, each morning, 10 to 15 minutes. And from there, we can relax the body enough to do the cognitive work, the processing. But if I'm in fight or flight, if my body's dysregulated, I'm not in a place to... This is why so many people, I think, don't feel that therapy's been helpful to them, right? So that's where I like to start with kids, get a good regimen of daily practices, and then let's see where we are.
Yeah, it sounds like you're giving them, like the question, tools, where I've been through therapy and done therapy, and it's just been like asking questions, sitting on a couch, sitting in a room, which I don't think is not. I think there are benefits to it, but I believe there has to be more. There has to be things people can do on their own, because 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, 1 hour a month, just having a conversation on a couch for 30 minutes to an hour and just asking questions it's not enough. And, you mentioned cold exposure, and that's where I found it like 10 years ago was when I started reading the mental benefits. I stayed away from it because all my health and wellness friends were doing it for the physical, and there wasn't much research backing that. Like the sauna is actually probably more beneficial for the physical, but the mental. And so I still do it to this day, and I do it every morning, and it like, no matter what kind of, I may seem like the joyful warrior, but I wake up as a funk sometimes, and that like totally switches me on, which is great. But even movement, I just, you talk about trauma wounding the body. And I'm going to share something that happened actually last week with a group of people. And I've always believed this is why I found movement. That's why I teach movement, because it's what I love to do. And I see it affects people like mentally, physically, like they're connected. So if we can get some sort of release, but this is the cool story. So last week, as you know, I taught a couple workshops. They were mobility workshops. They were with educators, in a school district and people on staff. And both of them afterwards was the coolest thing. It was just, I talked for a little bit, shared some of my stories, my trauma, like, for about 15 minutes or so. And then I went around the room, asked why they're here. And it was like a lot of surface level stuff. Long story short, the end, everybody came up to me, even a man who big, burly, like football player looking dude. And they all looked emotional, but in a good way. And they're like, I haven't felt that good in a long time. In fact, several who felt comfortable, they looked all stunned for the one thing, which is crazy. Because if from outside looking in, you're like, he's just doing some movement. But there was so much more to it. But I had several people that pulled me aside. They're like, who finally shared some of their trauma, like somebody, they got cancer through COVID and they used to be avid in like martial arts and all this stuff. It was a woman. And then she's like, hasn't done much, but like, she was just surprised that in 45 minutes, how much better she felt mentally, how much physical. She's like, you have no idea what you just did for me. Like, I didn't know I could do these things. I didn't know how good something could feel. A guy similar, and story after story of just, it made me like, holy crap, I might be onto something here. But it's like, I've been doing this and I've had this, but it was really just bringing you down and simplifying it and showing how we move in, mobility, but call it what you will. It wasn't yoga, but just moving in a fashion that we can release stuff in our body and our mind to the point that like people have to just stop and stare and like, holy crap, this is all I maybe needed to start with. And that's what I encourage them, just try to do something like this for even 5 minutes every morning and see how you feel. So sorry to be a little long-winded there, but I wanted to share it because I knew, that could help the listeners in like what you're trying to talk about. Obviously I worked on some breath work. I didn't really talk on that. There was meditation within connecting to their body. I moved really slow, which a lot of people see me in my videos that I'm like doing like CrossFit and fast, but like when I'm with my clients, we start out really, really slow. And this was an intro of sorts. So I just wanted to double down on what you had to say there. And I appreciate you sharing that, man.
You know what? And if I could expand on that briefly, I was at a conference with some people from Yale a few weeks ago. And I was talking to a very high level psychologist there. He presented some research around what's called post-acute withdrawal syndrome. For addiction, it's like how the brain, if you have all this dopamine stuff going on and different neurotransmitters are out of whack, how long does it take you to come back to your baseline? Usually it's about a year on average. It can be more, it can be less. But the research they were doing at Yale, what they found was with light to moderate exercise, I think it was like 20 to 30 minutes, like 4 or 5 times a week. I forget the exact measurements. But essentially, when they looked at a control group and they had people who did the light to moderate exercise and people who didn't. I'm not talking about like crazy lifting at the gym, just like even like a jog, yoga, right? Light to moderate. I think the number was it a 60 to 70% faster recovery of post-acute withdrawal syndrome in the brain. So it's a lot of the emotional stuff that comes after. So what you're describing, again, intuitive, it's aligned with spiritual traditions, and the most cutting edge science is like now demonstrating that as well. It's beautiful.
Have you seen some of this research coming out? And if you haven't, that's fine. But it's showing, we already know the benefits of movement for obviously the physical and even the mental now. But like there's some larger, longer term studies that are basically they've like put to the test of both like antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and just like exercise. And exercise is always showing improvement more. Where in some of the cases where they're doing, I'm not going to say which ones because I don't even remember, but a certain antidepressants, anti-anxiety medicines are actually shown to do nothing or make some of the patients even worse, where the exercise every single time in every single case in every single study, like even some of it was just basic walking for like 30 minutes a day. And I was just like blown away by this. And it just goes back to show, move every joint every single day. If that's all you do, it's some of the best thing you can do for your mental health. And then of course the physical will come, whatever your goals are. So have you seen some of this?
Yeah, I know that the research, and I'm not a medical doctor, so I'll be very clear with your listeners. I'm not here to tell you what to do as far as medication.
I know, you're so smart,
The
man.
research that I'm aware of, no. So the research I'm aware of, more and more, it's showing that the antidepressants are not longitudinally as effective as we once thought. And also even just like the basic premise that depression is directly related to serotonin levels. It's not to say that it's not at all, but not nearly as much as we once thought. So I think as a baseline, if we're using a lot of drugs and alcohol and we're going through stuff, let's cut those out a little bit. If we're eating unhealthy, well, let's tweak that a little. If we're not sleeping, if we're not exercising, let's get all these things in line and then see where you're at. And if you're, quote, treatment resistant, you're not responsive to interventions, then we can bring more and more in. But I think as a baseline for wellness, we know this.
So giving your varied interests, we know you hike. I mean, that was one of the things when we connected on the little app we're connected. It's like, oh, this guy's a hiker like me. I love it. Live music, similar. Both play instruments, another connection. And one thing we're not, I mean, I know you do like competitive paintballing, which is awesome, but Magic the Gathering, that's you, not me. Do you use or do you integrate some of these into your therapeutic practices? I'm curious, but you have a lot of cool interests.
Man, I wish when I worked at that program I could have brought kids paintballing. That would have been sick. Now, I have
you never
used Magic
know.
cards with kids. I think, and you have kids, I mean, I'd be curious your thoughts, but like, I think kids today, even kids who weren't born before June 07, I think it was when the iPhone first came out, I think they intuitively like want other ways to connect with each other that don't involve a screen, right? So I have used the Magic cards. I've taught kids in session and we'll play, especially kids who are anxious and like just talking to someone is very like, ugh. You know, to like play a card game. I have chess here in my office, you know, different things like that. I have a whiteboard we use. So just different little modalities around creativity, art, all these things kids respond really well to. In that program I worked at, and individually with kids, if they're into rap in particular, a lot of kids like trap, drill, all this kind of stuff today. Having them, instead of like calling it journaling, because that sounds lame, write about your grandpa who just passed away, write about your breakup, write about the thing you went through as a kid, put it to words and lyrics and verse. And we actually had a full-on recording studio in the program I worked at. And kids would write incredible, heartfelt music. So yeah, dude, I bring in whatever I can that I offer it, at least, you know, whatever I can.
That has reminded me of something that I tripped upon. My daughter, my youngest, can't remember it. There's a TikTok page. Not that I'm on it that much, but I'll do it for like music, where I'll post like my hand drumming or something, or maybe even a clip from this. But I forget the name of it, but if I can find it or remember it before the end of this podcast. But it's really cool because it started like from that. We're just writing out lyrics of your pain or your trauma or whatever. And then some of these people are now on like Spotify and getting labels, but it was just like, let's just sing out your pain. Let's write it out. They had like 30 minutes to do it and put together. And some were like 1 minute, 2 minute songs, but it's really cool. But, you know, you mentioned, you asked essentially like, what are my thoughts on it since I have 3 kids you said kids enjoy other things versus screen. And from my experience, I believe so. But I would go so as far, they enjoy other things with other people, even adults in their life, not just parents. For example, I can get my kids to pretty much do most things if I'm involved. For example, clean your room. No. Hey, let's clean it together. They might push back a little bit, but they'll do it. Hey, go practice your instrument. Go practice. Like, it looks like a chore, just like telling somebody to go work out as an adult. They don't want to, but if they get a workout partner, we already know. But with my kids, so if I go shoot some pucks with my hockey player kids, I don't play lacrosse, but my daughter will, every single time she plays lacrosse, will play lacrosse catch if I go with her. Anything like versus a video, I'll go. So I've been substitute teaching the last several weeks, and I've been in a lot of, there's another name for it. They don't call it special needs classrooms, but I can't remember the name. But essentially it's like there's more like one-on-one or 1-on-3 attention, and all the kids have computers now in school, stuff we didn't have, laptops, and they have some free time and time where they can use it. But just being the health guy, I want to get them off of it without saying get off. Plus I'm not in control or in charge. I'm just like helping out. But if they like have a choice between that or something creative, or even just playing creative. I think play is such a beneficial thing, especially with the toys that they provide at school. If I go sit down and play with them, they will choose that every single time over the iPad. But if you go tell them to play, they'll get on the iPad, right? Probably because it's easier. They think they like it. With anything. Same thing with my son. Like, I'll go back to that, back and forth. Like, whether it's a musical instrument or work, if you're doing even math with them, as opposed to them telling them to do the math, even if you're horrible at it, like if you attempt it, like I could go on all day, but like in so many different examples from my own kids, other kids in my life, to even teams that I've coached, when I'm an active participant, even a horrible one, they seem to choose that most, if not all the time, versus doing it themselves or, like you said, the screen. And everyone knows on this by this point, I'm a wholehearted fan of writing, from the most therapeutic thing I ever did to writing my books. So I always share, write it out, even if you just, and then read it out if you can in front of yourself, in front of a mirror, or in front of somebody. And that's always been massively beneficial. So
totally. I think that relates to what we call co-regulation, right? If anyone listening has a child above the age of 2, when your child's learning to walk, they would fall. When they would fall, before they cry, they would typically do what? They look at you. That's just co-regulation, mirror neurons in the brain. Now, 2-year-old doesn't know that, parent probably doesn't know that, but we look for cues of safety around us. So if I have a task I'm presented with, something that's stressful or different or new, and if I have someone, a friend, a parent, a teacher, a mentor, who's guiding me, let's do this together, and you're regulated, I can feel safe, my nervous system can relax, and my frontal lobe can come online into executive functioning, planning, creation. And again, brain body science just catching up now to these things that we intuitively just know.
Yeah, and you said something there too, that like with my kids, me and my wife agreed on, like, unless they're really hurt, don't, oh, are you okay? Like, we never did that. And our kids have usually been okay. Like, they've fallen out of trees, they've done some things, and we've just not ignored it, but we just looked at them and just waited, and they usually pick themselves up, brush themselves off. They might ask for a Band-Aid. I remember my youngest, we're in the Adirondacks in Lake Placid, and she literally cut her butt cheek open on a chair. And she's like, I'm fine. But then we looked, I was like, oh my God, we got to get stitches. But it's just like, you still got to be a parent and not brush everything off, but it just shows like the strong will of just not, and our kids don't really get injured that much either, by the way. Like, I see a lot of kids getting hurt from minor stuff, which could be a number of different things, but it's just how we've always parented. So speaking of schools, your background as a school counselor, mental health coordinator, how does your practice, how do you approach like school related challenges, like your methodology?
Yeah, man. I'm so passionate about that. I believe that every single individual, for the most part, in this country who's ended up addicted, in jail, institutionalized psychiatrically, passed away, overdose, whatever, they were all in school first. Maybe they didn't get through all 12 grades, but they were in school. So that to me is the front line. And the average counselor, I mean, anyone listening, you can Google your state average school counselor caseload size. It can be between like 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 for one counselor. And so much of that nowadays has been pushed into like testing and scheduling and academic phone calls instead of like, how are your kids doing? Their mental health, their wellness, right? It's so important. So at Quantum, one of the things that we're very, very, very passionate about is partnering with local schools. I'm in schools like tomorrow I'm in a high school, Thursday I'm at a university. Like, we're constantly working with our school-based partners because we know that so many people, staff included, by the way, are really going through it there, So we get consents to release, and we meet regularly, phone calls regularly with school, especially the counseling-based supports, and just team everything. Everything's a team approach.
In New York, it's 221 to 1. The average student to school counselor ratio.
That ain't bad. California years ago was the worst. I don't know the numbers now. I haven't checked in a while, but I think there's a real need for more school-based mental health service. So I'm a huge advocate for that here in New Jersey.
I was just curious about that. Yeah, that's interesting. So that's not bad. Okay, the average though per nation is 385 to 1 in the U.S.
So imagine right now your child was depressed, and they say it's something like between 25 and 50% of kids have at least on some level contemplated self-harm or suicide. It's a high number. Okay, so you have one person for hundreds of kids to just keep an eye on things.
Whoa, that makes me think too. If New York is 221, and there's probably even some better than that, but the average is 385 to 1. There's probably schools that are like 500 to 1, 600 to 1, like to balance that out. Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, my mom was a guidance counselor in school, and she was passionate in similar ways as you, but you could tell in the latter part of her career, which she's retired now, she was getting frustrated because it became more administrative paperwork and the things that you talk about, and like not why she got into it in the first place. And yeah, she ended up getting frustrated with it. So, I mean, schools are so interesting. Our kids are going to schools, and I think they face so many more challenges in a different way than we ever did. I mean, in my daughter's school alone, one of the things that's frustrating me, it's like, I just want her to get a good education, and I wish I could almost homeschool it, because it's like, there's some great teachers there. We like our school district, but it's turned into where she's coming home with all these other things, like, and she didn't know what anxiety or depression was. She's like, yeah, most of the kids I know are medicated. They've had a lock pretty much, or I don't know if lock's the right term. I don't want to get school district trouble. But basically, there's only one bathroom where you can access at any time, because like vaping and fighting and drugs have become such a problem in them, especially the vaping part of it. And so there's all these little distractions from the kids just to be able to get a good education. There's other things too I could list. So like, and then we're seeing how that evolves in society. There's a book that I read that I'll talk about on here called Coddling of the American Mind, and what they're seeing. If you haven't read it, you should check it out, about like what's going on and what's happening on our university campuses and what our youth are going into. So anything you want to chat more about that as far as?
I'll just say I'm not into like school and teacher bashing. Like that's not my thing. I've seen a lot of good. I've seen a lot of amazing people. I know a lot of amazing educators, school-based mental health folks. And, I'm friends with the former president of the State School Counseling Association. He and I were talking not too long ago. And he said the amount of numbers of counselors leaving to go private, it's staggering. There's a mental health crisis in this country, specifically when it comes to school-based supports. So anyone listening to this, if you can advocate with your Board of Education, what is our average caseload? What can we do? How can we maybe get an extra counselor in this building? These kind of things so important. I think that schools are a canary in the coal mine for our whole society, brother. If I have a kid in school who's fighting in a gang, getting high, self-harm, whatever, teen pregnancy is at all-time high right now, all these concerns that we track, right?
Yeah, depression.
What does that say about society? Back to the holistic perspective, the why. Why you engage in that behavior? Well, let's start with home, right? Start with multi-generational traumas, start with community. So the kids, it's just a representation of what's happening in our larger society. So when I hear people say things like, well, schools, and I don't trust school. Dude, your kid's going to face these challenges regardless. Not that I'm here to tell anyone how to parent.
Yeah, no, I think that's key. I think there's too much, I imagine, from what I see, too much trying to prevent the tragedy of the problems or the adversity as far as teaching them how to overcome it. I will say, I think about this almost daily, like and talking with my wife sometimes, like sometimes I want to have my kids have a harder life, because that's what's built. Like me and my wife both have had challenging childhoods and adulthoods, and it's what's built us to who we are, and we know how to overcome. And with each layer level, it's like a video game. I get better at it. It may not be easy all the time, but now I can teach to my kids how to overcome the challenges and the failures. Like, our kids have faced, but we've seen them overcome. Like, for example, my daughter didn't make a lacrosse team last year that she wanted to be on, which is super emotional because she's always made it. She's always done it. And then all of a sudden she didn't the last year. And by having supportive parents and belief in her, and then just showing her how to overcome, man, this year she's a whole different player. She's the fastest on her team. Night and day. She was good, but she went from good to even way better. I refrain from using the word great because great means you're there, but she looks so amazing, and she's so much more positive, her self-esteem, but she did it on her own with our support, and she overcame that. And I think that's the key to being challenged. Similar situation my son's dealing with right now, but he's doing all right. So let's talk about that family before we got some time here, like the family complexities. Obviously I've shared my story on here and we've talked about it, and they play a significant role. We are our environment of sorts. So, teens, young adults, how do you guys impact the family dynamics? Like what strategies do you guys employ? What can some things that listeners that are maybe dealing with some stuff that even if they never take your practices could take away from this?
Totally. Well, we talked a few minutes ago about the idea of co-regulation, right? And that we call it also neuroception, the way that the brain can kind of assess the environment. So I don't believe that parents are like the problem, right? Some people would say that kind of thing. I don't think that's accurate. I don't believe that anyone's that powerful. We can only change someone they're in diapers, as I've heard it said. But that said, significantly more often than not, when we get phone calls here at Quantum and the child has quote anxiety, I can feel the anxiety coming through the phone in the parent. I can feel it in my body. It's significant. So if I'm in a family dynamic and there's stress or anxiety or substance use or whatever the case may be, that's contagious. Anxiety is very contagious for survival reasons, right? If it's an unsafe environment, we should all be on edge and alert. So what strategies do we employ is, I think, again, it's back to awareness. With Quantum, for us, it's about consciousness, expanding consciousness more than just like tools and coping. If I don't have the awareness of the quote problem, don't love that word either, but if we don't have awareness of the problem, how can we even talk about solutions? So helping parents as a mirror to see what their role is and how are you taking care of yourself? Your kid's getting therapy, beautiful. I'm not a car wash. You don't drop them off to come out squeaky clean, right? Especially when he talks about major behavioral stuff or substance use. That is a family disease. And that's something the whole family has to shift. When the client is no longer the identified patient, as we say, we don't have to worry about the client. What are you going to worry about next? Right? So often when a kid gets better, someone else in the family, their issues start to come to the surface because now there's space for it. So it's about awareness. It's about communication. It's about boundaries, expectations, and natural consequences. And I speak a lot on that in our community partners and schools. Without clear boundaries and expectations and consequences, kids, they don't know where they're at. That breeds more anxiety. There has to be structure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be controversial for somebody that heard that when you said, I don't believe parents are the problem, because I've heard so many people, and I'm sure I said it early, like years ago, but then I realized, man, it was because of them. And I talk about it, on here in my book, like it's because of them and their experiences why I am who I am. So it's like I'm, everyone is where they're at, and I truly believe my parents are trying to do the best they can. And so I like that you did say that, and I think more people need to hear that. Man, like there's got to be.
Sometimes they're not helping the situation. If your child's anxiety is lessening and then you're piling your anxiety onto them, you're working against the process that you signed them up for.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that to blame is but like
no, and like if they're and you can't kick it, like you don't want to encourage the kids to run away, and if they're underage, that's their home. It is what it is. So you need to give them tools and teach them how to respond or not respond, and have some emotional intelligence and guidance, and that's where you come, and it's got to go deeper, which it sounds like you're doing in what I would call some pioneering work. I feel like this is not the norm. I feel like you're innovative in what you're doing. I mean, from what it sounds like. So I imagine with that, like you face some significant challenges, maybe even skepticism possibly from clients or peers. Does that happen? So how do you address that?
Yes.
Like, what are some ways you demonstrate your value or your approach?
Well, I think the opposite of anxiety is control. It's like a seesaw. So I have a lot of anxiety, which is a future-based who, what, where, when, why, unforeseen inherently. the more control I can have to control outcomes, the better I feel in the moment. Not necessarily helpful in the long term if we're trying to shift our mindset and behavior. So for instance, I can think of, someone the other day called, I matched them with someone on my team. They had an initial conversation, felt great. Everyone's happy, good to go. And then the client heard from someone that the person should have a PhD. And this person on my team did not have a PhD. Therefore, they were pulling the plug the day before their first session. So yeah, and all respect, no judgment. It's your healing path and your journey. But I think as someone who works in higher ed, if you think that the letters after someone's name, mine included, make them good or bad or better, or I don't know about that. So yeah, we face skepticism. I think we do CBT, we do DBT, right? We do these more traditional models of therapy. I'm a huge fan. There's an enormous amount of research efficacy around them. And I think it's a very narrow view, especially from a holistic place. What about the body? Right? So people resonate with our message. They don't. Our results speak for themselves. Our data is phenomenal. And I'm grateful to be, it seems like one of the holistic practices in New Jersey, in the New York area. I don't want to say we're like pioneering, but we're definitely like leading the charge, I think, within our community.
Yeah. So what are some of the things, obviously I would imagine you follow some of your own advice, right? Like what are some of the things that you do on a daily or weekly that, somebody could be hearing? I was like, I might try that this coming from you who, is teaching people these things.
Yeah, man. It's, I like having tools in my toolbox. So I know that for me, anxiety is not something that is my go-to. When I'm really going through it, I go to the other end of the energetic scale. My energy drops. It doesn't increase, right? When I do feel anxious or I'm going through some acute period of stress, breath work works great for me. My wife does a lot of Kundalini yoga, and her teacher taught me a certain breath work regimen that I use myself when I need it. It's extremely helpful after a few days of consistent practice. I use it with my kids. I've had almost, I think, 100% success in the past 2 years with kids who have nausea. They're throwing up before school from anxiety using this technique. So I definitely use breath work. When I'm feeling more on the lower end, burned out, depressed, down, just everything kind of collapses in at moments. Nature is big for me. Hiking, physical exercise, and moving energy through the body. Very helpful. Music, seeing it, playing it, writing it, listening to it always puts my mood in a better spot if I'm going inward. In a greater sense, spirituality for me, the more connected I feel to whatever this is, called God, called the universe, called consciousness, called quantum mechanics, this sense that everything's connected, right? Where do we come from? Where do we go? The more I'm tapped into that, the more I'm able to be in places of acceptance. And I get a lot of that from Eastern philosophy like Buddhism. So I draw from whatever I feel I need in the moment, but all these modalities are tremendously helpful for me.
It's so interesting how we've had such a variety of people, and we're talking about variety, like even, just all over the board, and how people that are dealing with and trying to strive and thrive through life, no matter what it brings through them, and navigate the various challenges. And there's very similar things, breath work, nature. And I wonder when there'll come a time where people will see how simple, but maybe not easy. It's not easy to maybe get in a habit and dedicating, 30 minutes a day of getting outside and into nature or doing breath work or whatever it might be. But yet people take the more uncomfortable and I think harder route, eventually just not doing these things. And then it comes down to, medications, surgeries, expensive therapy, and all these other things. So, man, where do you see the future as we're starting to wrap it up here? Where do you see the future of mental health? Especially where you're incorporating quantum approaches, how do you envision quantum psychotherapy, you guys evolving and just this area that you mentioned is just growing. It's growing. Mental health, just like obesity, is growing, and there's billions of dollars thrown at, I would imagine, mental health, because there's billions of dollars thrown at physical health, and we're just seeing things get worse. So, yeah.
So I'll speak in general terms, and I'll speak to quantum. So I was speaking with a friend who works at an Ivy League university doing research in neuropsychology type stuff. And there's a study happening right now. I don't want to say too much about it, but long story short, they're finding that kids' brains are actually different. They're changing compared to the prior generation, like physiologically, like measuring size, weight, development, growth. The growth is actually changing, where we used to think that, development, depending on who you ask, research you look at, as an adult male, if you have a trauma history, around 27, a lot of the emotional centers of the brain are kind of done. We're thinking of expanding that to 30 to 33 tremendously. So kids' brains are actually different. I say this to say that where do I see the future going? Things are not getting better. And I hear the folks who say things like, well, there's more awareness and now everyone's a snowflake. And I think there's some validity in some of those perspectives.
I just say when anybody says one thing,
however,
it's never just one thing.
Right. Objectively, scientifically, we're noticing that kids today, their brains are different. I think technology is a piece. We can go on and on into that wormhole. But folks are recognizing that traditional talk therapy of just like, how does that make you feel? And here's our coping strat. It's not sufficient enough to meet the needs of today for many folks. Like 80% around of our clients, we have almost 200 clients at Quantum. 80% of our clients have had prior therapy before and either wasn't helpful, quote unquote, or they felt it was, and then they plateaued and looking for more. I think spirituality is on the rise, whatever that means for folks in a non-denominational sense. We're like, who am I? Where am I going? What is this intuition, this sense I get? Again, call it quantum mechanics, call it anything you want, but like this deep gut knowing I have. How do I strengthen that like a muscle? Plant medicine use is on the rise. Where can I go and talk to a clinician where they're not going to judge that and call it necessarily a drug? So I think in a field, this holistic approach is getting more and more popular, as it should be, because the desire is greater. For quantum, what do I hope? I hope that as a practice owner, I can use it as a platform to do greater good. I'm working with legislators around things like school-based mental health, substance use funding, these kind of things. So stepping into the legislative stuff. I know great people at the New Jersey Psychedelic Assisted Therapy Association who are trying to do some work right now. In schools, like I said, that advocacy and getting back into communities. I'd love to start a nonprofit and get into the inner city, work with gang kids again.
Yeah, and I've mentioned that, and like not on here, but just like simple talking therapy, like you said, does not work, and they've shown that simple talking therapy might even make things essentially worse. And there's been some books on that, and it may bring out kids start thinking there is something wrong with them when there wasn't. So, man, this has been great, man. Obviously, I want people to know how they can learn more, engage in your service. So, share what's the best way to start if they wanted to connect with you.
Sure. So I guess Instagram nowadays is the thing. So we're at Quantum Therapy NJ, like New Jersey, Quantum Therapy NJ. We do a lot of different events in the tri-state area. We do women's retreats. We do women's circles, especially a lot of women-based programming. Men's groups are starting up now, virtually in-person weekend retreats elsewhere. So check us out. If you don't want psychotherapy, we have a lot of different holistic type community building events going on. Our website is quantumpsychotherapy.com. And if I could just briefly plug just some people who I'm inspired by, that nothing to do with me, but the work of Gabor Mate. I'm sure many people know him by now. In my opinion, the world's leading addiction expert. I'm a huge fan of Mastin Kipp, Kipp. Mastin Kipp is great around the nervous system and its impact on trauma. Deb Dana, LCSW. She's really great for polyvagal theory as well. So there's some really incredible people online who are getting this message out there, and folks are listening.
Awesome, man. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we get off here today? It's been a great conversation.
Just gratitude, man. Gratitude for you, the work you're doing, and this idea of, again, I'm embodying like who I am or what I talk about or what I do is who I am. And we're friends personally. I know you, your story, your past, your present, and like you're the real deal. And I'm grateful that you're using this platform to try to get the message out to help others. It's a beautiful transmutation.
Thanks, man. Well, we appreciate everyone that's tuned in. Obviously, we could go longer on this conversation. There's obviously plenty of tips that he's provided on here. But if you'd like to learn more, we'll have those links below. But thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Strive 365. As you know, this is always supported by you, the listener, the viewer. So continue to like, share, subscribe, comment below, because that's one way by just sharing and subscribing to our podcast that you can help even one individual with all the things that we provide here on Strive 365. So thank you again for tuning in. Take care.